Greetings, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen. This webinar, which is entitled Business Mannerism and Relationship with Diplomats and Media, is an intricate discussion that delves into the science of establishing diplomatic relations in a social, political, and business environment. Our speakers today come from diverse backgrounds, and I'm very pleased to introduce Mr. Nicolas Weeks and Mr. Stewart Law. Mr. Nicolas Weeks is the Deputy Head of Mission, representing the Embassy of Sweden in Bangkok. He has an extensive background with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Sweden, at the UN headquarters in New York, and the Swedish Embassy in Beijing. Mr. Stuart Lau is the Europe Correspondent for the Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post, one of the Asia Pacific premium newspapers. Prior to this, he was a journalist with the BBC World News and a fellow at the Oxford University Politics Department. So I would like to begin our session today by letting our speakers share their experiences and their opinion on media, diplomacy, and international relations in this age of changes. Some factors of change include, for example, government lockdowns, travel bans, increasing protectionism, deteriorating relations between China and the United States, and emerging technology business models, and diffusion of social media and fake news. So I would like to ask Mr. Weeks and Mr. Law to share for roughly 5 minutes their opinion about this theme, and then we will move on to the panel discussion.
Dr. Bersano, thank you very much. Would you like Mr. Lau or myself to start?
Oh, you can start. You can please start.
Well, once again, thank you very much. I'm very honored to be part of this this webinar and this discussion. Thank you, Dr. Bersano, for inviting me, and thank you also my co-panelist, Mr. Lau. I will try to keep it. You asked each of us to try to limit ourselves to 5 to 10 minutes. I will try my best to do that. For the benefit of your students, and hello to all esteemed students as well, I would like to just make some introductory remarks of the role of what an embassy does, if you will allow me. So the primary role of an embassy, and this goes for most foreign services around the world, is to assist its citizens and represent the government in the host country. In our case, consular work assisting our citizens is constitutionally regulated and therefore a priority above other tasks. So, for example, during the pandemic, we have had to put aside other types of work in order to safeguard that our citizens have the best possible protection and help. This meant that we had to shift all of our staff to consular work, almost all of them. A similar process, we went through a similar process during the tsunami back in 2004. So the ambassador here, and I'm the deputy of the embassy, meaning I'm the second person in charge. So when my ambassador is away, I run this embassy, represent the embassy. So my ambassador is the direct representative of the Swedish government in Thailand. Our role is very much to establish networks within the Thai government, within Thai society, within the community in general, and in particular within the business community. The overall overarching mission of the embassy is to strengthen all types of ties between Sweden and Thailand, and to strengthen them, and of course improve them, and deepen the relationship, whether it be politically, economically, culturally, academically, etc. And an embassy very much has a door-opening function vis-à-vis Thai authorities in particular, whether it be helping our companies to get a foothold on the Thai market, or helping them to solve issues when they feel that they cannot solve them themselves, if they need sort of official help of the Swedish government. Our role is also to explain Thailand to the Swedish government back home, in order for them to have the best possible material to formulate the Swedish policy towards Thailand, and any kind of decisions that are made. So diplomacy is very much a vehicle to promote our interests and our values vis-à-vis decision makers and the general public. It almost always coincides with those of our Nordic countries, Denmark, Finland, Norway, Iceland. We try to act together jointly. We have regular coordinations, and mostly with the European Union as a whole. Our main pillars that we want to promote are democracy and human rights, the open economy, which means as much free trade as possible, sustainability, and climate change mitigation and resilience. So also we try to partner up with Thailand on different issues within the United Nations to have common ground. And we have a particular strong relationship with Thailand on all levels, from the royal family and down. The Thai embassy in Stockholm tells us there are 70,000 Thais in Sweden, and there are always a minimum of, well, except now during the pandemic, 15,000 or so Swedes here in Thailand. So what has happened now during the pandemic? The importance of public diplomacy, including digital diplomacy, was already before the pandemic significantly on the rise, and so it's now more important. We are all moving into the digitalization at a faster pace. I mean, this development would most likely have taken place anyway. It's just that we've advanced the rapid pace. We also know that global travel and interaction due to the pandemic will have changed forever. We will see new patterns of doing business, new patterns of socializing and meeting. We have seen from our interaction with Swedish companies here in Thailand that those that have automated production have been literally almost untouched. Only some challenges with global supply chains remain. You're asked, I mean, one of the main themes here is media and social media. Our main vehicle here to promote ourselves and to interact with Thais, whether it be the general public or the decision makers, is Facebook. We're also on Twitter to promote our policy ideas. But of course, social media presents advantages and challenges. Advantages in the way that we can reach a large number of people in a very cost-effective way. I would say more cost-effective than ever in history. We have the advantage of instant interaction with our entire audience. Challenges are very significant. Users tend to narrow their scope. The phenomenon of so-called echo chambers, where people who tend to have the same types of interests gather in the same space, and they sort of mutually reinforce their views. So objectivity is difficult to achieve with this massive spread. The attention span narrows among users. Users tend to follow different types of streams in their social media. Infotainment and instant gratification becoming sort of the norm. So there's a challenge for us as an embassy or as a foreign service to be noticed in this landscape of information overload. Another challenge, which I know you want us to touch upon, is disinformation campaigns. They have increased considerably in the last 5 years, and the degree of sophistication becomes greater and greater. Sweden is, as most of you might know, we're a very small country. We have around 10 million inhabitants. We're very dependent on trade. There are a lot of household names, such as IKEA, Volvo, Ericsson, Electrolux, H&M. They're all Swedish companies with global supply chains, and all of them have production here in Thailand. But there are also new industries and brand names you might know of, such as Spotify, Skype, Minecraft, fashion brands like Fjällräven, Nudie Jeans, and Cheap Monday Jeans. So we're very much dependent on continued open trade because of the pandemic and other factors, the US trade, China trade, so-called trade war. We are finding it more and more difficult and more challenging, and therefore we have to raise our voice and as clearly as possible try to influence partners around the world that we all can benefit from an open trade policy. The latest initiative we have is a drive to make now during pandemic times all kinds of trade in medication and healthcare products tariff-free. We have the support of our EU partners, and we're moving it to the WTO. This was my introduction, which is almost 9 minutes, so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weeks, and thank you for sharing a very informative session and introduction. And I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Law. And I think that Mr. Law can begin from one of the insights from Mr. Weeks, especially the one related to the relations between the European Union and China, and the push of Sweden and other European countries to ensure that international trade will keep working as it did in the last 30 years.
Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Pisano, for inviting me to join this very interesting webinar with your school and your students. It's a very interesting opportunity for us to, for me, and I guess for Mr. Weeks as well, to step back from our usual sort of business duty and to sort of refresh about, the goings on, and to sort of bring some insights to your students. And just to give you a broad overview of what I do here. So as you said in the beginning, I work as the Europe Correspondent based in Brussels for the South China Morning Post, a newspaper based in Hong Kong, where I grew up in. And I arrived in this job about a year ago, and that was exactly the time when EU-China relations started to become a matter of intense interest among policymakers, think tankers, diplomats here in Europe. And of course, this level of interest only increases all the more under COVID-19. So I think there are two very interesting dimensions here which might be of interest to you and your students. Firstly, between journalists and diplomats, and secondly, between journalists and business people. And so to begin with the first one, which is the relationship between journalists and diplomats, of course, there's a lot of interest, as I just said, among journalists in terms of what diplomats do, but also the other way around. A lot of interest about diplomats here, about what's going on in China and in Hong Kong. And so definitely there are both opportunities and challenges. The opportunities being, of course, so much news going on, and also, a lot of COVID-related uncertainty about the exact health situation, economic situation, and so on and so forth. The challenges being, of course, we're in the age of social distancing now, so it's not really that easy to meet up with people from, very frequently, very easily. And so a lot of planning has to be done, and a lot of technical support has to be provided. And also true for the journalist coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is, for example, you're from Italy, and of course, Italy is so devastated by the COVID-19 pandemic. But even for me, being based in Europe, it's not really that easy for me to do any sort of frontline journalism in Italy because of all the flight restrictions. And even if I went to Italy, there would not be any hotel accommodations. And so a lot of logistical concerns under this new normal, and definitely challenges for journalists and I guess everybody. And the second dimension that I would like to address in this beginning and part of my speech is the relationship between media and business. That's a very interesting topic. I mean, if we look at, for example, it's not just COVID, of course, but of course, this is also all the more interesting under the pandemic. We look at all the airlines, suffering from terrible economic situations. We look at all the supply chains being interrupted. And so a lot of also very interesting news stories, I guess, for journalists to work on, but also for business people to touch upon in terms of their public engagement. And so definitely, as you mentioned, EU-China relations and COVID-19, those are very interesting topics, and I'm pretty sure I will get a lot of questions on those topics from your students in the coming hour. Thank you.
Thank you both for your introduction. So I think we can move on with the panel discussion that will be based mostly on the questions that our students prepared. So I would like to keep this session very informal, I would say, not to dig too much into official. So I will go through a few questions from the student side. So I have a first question that is probably a little bit tricky for Mr. Lau, and I think this is also quite related to COVID-19 time. And the question is how to balance the authenticity and the censorship as a journalist, and a little bit more prompts how to report news in a country where censorship is strictly enforced, and how to assess the authenticity of government information.
Well, of course, information and censorship is a big challenge for mainland China. And the advantage of being based in Hong Kong is that relatively we still enjoy a high degree of autonomy, which means that we're still constitutionally protected to exercise freedom of the media. But it's absolutely right. I mean, under COVID-19, there's a lot of, and I think Mr. Weeks also touched upon this before, in the age of social media in general, it's very difficult to verify information, especially when you're under a lot of time constrained, real-time sort of, 24/7 news cycles. And I think for journalists, it's really important. For example, my job here in Europe, when I heard something, I would definitely go to, diplomats like Mr. Weeks or some spokespeople from different government institutions to try to verify whether the information I got is authentic or not. And but of course, information doesn't always come from governments. Sometimes it comes from social media users. And so I guess for a lot of journalists, it's definitely a big challenge in terms of when we see something on Twitter, for example, I think 24 hours ago, you saw this video footage of Boris Johnson's car being hit by a protester, and then you got like videos going viral on social media. And then media organizations would very quickly pick up the video and write some news about it, while at the same time trying to get verification from the British government. So I think, as you rightly said, it's definitely challenging, but I guess everybody is trying to adapt to this challenge of information authenticity, of government censorship, of freedom of information, and all the relevant topics.
Thank you. I would like to link to one of the things you just mentioned. So like you mentioned about Twitter, and this will be a question for both of you. So Twitter, in a way, became a sort of online press office. And the question is, how should journalists use Twitters and how should diplomats use Twitter. So this is a sort of, I would say, like new online etiquette. So how would journalists and diplomats address this? Because both journalists and diplomats are very active on Twitter. So we would like to know a little bit, let's say, the back scene, the behind the scene about how to use Twitter in this new era.
Well, since you mentioned journalists first, so maybe I can go first. I think it's definitely a very important thing for journalists to maintain objectivity and to present both sides of the views, which is not always easy, especially for a lot of public broadcasters, where there's a lot of obligation, a lot of public duty to be impartial. But I would, for example, mention some controversy about journalists in the BBC, for example, and a lot of other public broadcasters as well. But they're under especially immense pressure when it comes to the coverage of Brexit, such a controversial topic. You know, you have Remainers on one side, you have Leavers on the other side. And then when journalists try to present, you know, viewpoints of one particular camp, you know, very often he or she would be portrayed as sympathizers or supporters or critics of particular camps. And so, and you know, not to mention the fact that, you know, each tweet only contains 280 characters. And so how can you present comprehensive ideas representing, you know, all aspects of society within 280 words? I mean, it's definitely impossible. And so it's definitely adding a lot of pressure on journalists. So I think it's a very steep learning curve for a lot of people, how to present stories on social media, well, with the use of videos sometimes, which sort of helps a little bit because it sort of goes beyond the 280 character rule, and you can have, for example, a 3-minute or 5-minute or 1 hour long footage to try to tell the story, you know, with more substance, with more context. But it's definitely right, and I think Mr. Weeks may have some interesting insights to input here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Lau. Dr. Bassana, would you like me to use my video or not? Would it help?
Yes, please. Yeah, please,
okay.
Please share your video.
Okay. So yes, I agree with Mr. Lau. It's difficult in everything he says. Diplomacy in general is steeped in traditions and protocol. So for us in diplomacy, and I dare speak for diplomacy in general, not only my own country, it's a steep learning curve, and there's been a lot of pressure on us to adapt to the world we live in, where everything happens instantly, and there's little time for reflection often. And what we want to do is to capture the attention of the users that we're targeting, right? So Twitter is different from other social media platforms such as Facebook in that it usually, in most countries, Twitter is a platform to reach policymakers, decision makers, and in general, business people, perhaps media representatives like Mr. Lau, NGOs. So we have a lot of our key targets within the Twitter community, but in order to break through the general noise on Twitter, it's not enough. Maybe it was when Twitter was born, to repeat buzzwords. You really need to get to the point and focus on what the message is. The message. So you need to package your tweets in a good way. I mean, unless you're the president of the United States, some people will get attention anyway. But if we're the embassy of Sweden or the ambassador of Sweden in Thailand, in order to break through the general noise, we won't get that many chances. We need to deliver real content that matter to people, and it's not enough to be a follower or to retweet. But we sort of need to lead by putting out content that is interesting, and we are still learning. We're not experts, I dare say, on this. Some embassies, they have large media teams. We have a quite small one, but our foreign service in general have made great leaps in how we use Twitter as a tool. But I mean, you get hundreds of tweets a minute, if you like, in your Twitter account. So to be relevant to people is the main challenge. Your mic, can't hear you.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much for sharing your opinion on this. And I have a question that I would say is quite in the same field. So our students asked about the recent online protest, especially in Europe, in America, and also sometimes in Asia as well. And I mean, we even had some like street protests in the United States. And so most of the time we have actually this kind of like protest going on online, on Twitter, on Facebook, and so on, using hashtag and this kind of actions. So I would like to hear your opinion on this. So would you recommend graduates to share their political views online, or do you think that would be better for them to keep them private? And can you suggest a social media etiquette to young graduates? So also these questions is for both of you, so we can start with Mr. Weeks and then Mr. Lau can give some further inputs.
Of course, Sweden is a very strong proponent of free speech and online media freedom. So we are very much, wherever we are in the world, we try to promote these values. But it wouldn't be responsible of me to say that whatever country you live in, you should express yourself in ways that will put you in harm's way. So my advice would be to think carefully. Unfortunately, I have to say that, depending on where you are. Sorry, the second part of your question was?
So, well, my last question was to balance between the freedom of expression, but also the concern for young graduates to find a job, because most of the time employers will screen their social media accounts. So how to find a suitable balance?
Since I think Mr. Weeks seems to be offline for the time being, so I think I can, I'm not particularly familiar with the job market in Thailand, I must say. So I would say as a general rule, it's always, I think, it would be it's also a very technical question for me, I would say, as a journalist, because, we are perhaps less bound by the same sort of restrictions that might apply to other businesses. And so, but if that is the case in Thailand, if that is the case for commercial businesses, then I think, it's really up for every student to think about what he or she would like to do in future. If they would like to join the government, for example, then they might have to think about the kind of tweets that they're putting out. If they are thinking of joining NGO, then of course they have all the freedoms they want to write about anything that they think. For businesses, well, if there is some sort of screening, which I'm not really familiar with, so I think then you're definitely right. I mean, it would be advisable for them to think twice in their day-to-day use of social media.
Thank you, Mr. Law. I don't see if Mr. Weeks is back or is still offline. Okay, so whilst we are waiting for Mr. Weeks to reconnect to the call, so let me move on with a further question for Mr. Law. So, well, I have a question a bit related to connections between businesses and media. And in a way like this, relationship could be very beneficial for both sides. And what our students ask is if, because of this connection between media and businesses, can media maintain their ethics? And is it fair for the society to receive the news that might be biased or influenced due to interest of businesses in the media industry?
Thank you. That's definitely a very interesting question. So I think there are two dimensions to this. So there are things that businesses want the media to publish, and there are things that the media want to publish, but businesses do not want to. And so the first dimension, of course, touches upon a more sort of blurry area between journalism and public relations efforts. For example, if you work in, let's say, a pharmaceutical company now, and you're doing a drug on COVID-19, and you're making some success here, and then you really want the media to report about the breakthroughs that you've made in the experimentation, then of course, from the business perspective, it makes perfect sense to pitch the story to journalists. As to whether journalists would actually run this article, it depends at the end of the day on newsworthiness, on whether it is newsworthy for the audience, for the readers, and public interest argument here plays a very big role, I would say. And so it's not like that 100% of what businesses want to do as part of their PR campaign would be turned down by the media. I would say we have a very stringent assessment about the newsworthiness, whether the public should know about it. And the second aspect that I just mentioned at the beginning is about the things that the media would like to talk about, which businesses do not necessarily want to, which could take place in many forms. Sometimes it's about a corruption case, sometimes it's about some sort of business misconduct, so on and so forth. And of course, businesses do not want this sort of negative coverage, but it doesn't mean that when the media actually have a case to write about such an event, and the business should immediately turn it down or threaten with legal action. I mean, of course, I'm speaking as a journalist, but I think if the businesses side could also provide some sort of collaboration, some sort of help, assistance in terms of media coverage to try to present their version of the stories, then of course it would also help the public to get a better understanding, a more balanced view about the news events that have been going on, and that will be covered in the future media report. If that answers your question.
Yes. And so I feel that we can elaborate a little bit further on this. And what would you suggest to business people? What would you suggest to entrepreneurs to get in touch with media? What kind of etiquette, what kind of mannerism business people should have as to establish long-lasting relationships with media?
Well, I think business executives, of course, play a very important role in our society, and of course there's a very strong need for a better relationship with the media for a lot of reasons. And it's right, it's not always easy, if I may say so, to keep good relationship with journalists, because journalists also have their own concerns about being seen to be too close to the business sector, to the political sector, to every stakeholder. And so I think what really matters here is, first of all, I'm sure a lot of business executives would already have very experienced, knowledgeable PR team, media relations team, to run this sort of media campaigns. And so I think it's always advisable for the business executives to reach out to the media via the PR team. And I guess, setting up regular contacts between business executives and journalists or other media representatives would also be very helpful. It's not necessarily for immediately running a news story the next day. I mean, sometimes it's just about setting up regular contacts to try to get to know about each other's jobs and what each other does. And so when I was still reporting in Hong Kong, for example, I covered corporate news for a very short period of time. And that process, of course, involved a lot of reaching out to, for example, real estate companies, which play a very big role in Hong Kong, usually via the PR team, but also sometimes, directly engaging the business executives. And so I think what really matters here is a few things, like relying on experience of the PR team, being confident about telling, their own version of the story, and really just being polite. I think that always plays a very important role in any kind of exchanges.
And can you give like a very hands-on example of how some business people approached you either in Hong Kong or in Europe, or some like effective way that you still remember maybe from the real estate sector that you just mentioned now?
I mean, usually big companies would reach out to the media via PR people. So I would say they're rather regular. It's not like anything special. Usually, when business executives want to talk to the media, they would, reach out to the PR team to try to set up, some sort of meetings with the journalists. And I mean, they would, of course, be very interested in what we do, what we're interested to do. So I think, one example maybe is that, the more recent example would be some European business think tanks, or, some business, I should say, advisory groups, they would be interested to talk to the media about international trade and sort of, I mean, it's also part of their usual job to do lobbying. It's not just for politicians, but also with the media to try to get a more balanced, more favorable coverage. And so I think that's, I would say, the day-to-day life of businesses and journalists.
Thank you. I think that Mr. Weeks is back with us, right? Mr. Weeks? Okay, I think we have to keep going with Mr. Law, and we will let you do some extra work today.
My pleasure.
Okay, we just told me that he should be, okay, he should be here. I'm trying to let him in. Should be in. Oh. Well, welcome back.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Good. So sorry I disappeared, and it took me about 5 minutes to reestablish myself with another computer. I'm very sorry about this lack in connectivity. Just shows us how vulnerable we are in these times when we're so much reliant on virtual meetings. So I think when I was broken off, I was talking about the shrinking space in terms of internet freedom. And you asked me what my recommendation was. We are a strong proponent of free speech online, and more people dare to speak out, the more critical mass we have. But the trend, of course, is that the world is becoming more authoritarian, and there is more restrictions on freedom. So it's as a private citizen, it's very difficult to navigate in this landscape. And you asked me also about etiquette.
Yes.
We have an etiquette on our...
I can relate to the last answer by Mr. Lau. So I asked him how business people should approach media and journalists. So I would like to ask you how business people and business students, like our students, should introduce themselves to diplomats, and in what occasion they can meet up with diplomats.
Well, the best way right now, of course, during pandemic times, is to meet us online. But I would say also this is the case during regular pre or post-COVID times. We are physically located in the capital of Thailand, of course. I mean, here in Bangkok, and as we are in all countries around the world, we're usually in the capital. We might have staff in other greater cities, like in China, we have Consulate General in Hong Kong, we have a Consulate General in Shanghai. Meeting us physically is not possible for most students, I would say. But we try to interact more by being at these types of events, by organizing seminars at academic seminars, universities. We typically, all countries have chambers of commerce. There are evenings for students where students can meet with business people. I think we can never replace entirely physical socializing, but it's a tricky question to answer. The best way to interact with us is via social media, our social media channels.
And so let me ask a question that is a little bit more practical. So if the students wonder how to properly write an email to an ambassador or a political leader, and what is the most appropriate way to address them, what title should be used?
Well, for ambassadors and for ministers and such, the typical honorific title to use is H.E. which stands for Her Excellency or His Excellency, and then any other title like yours, Doctor or Ambassador or whatever the title might be. So if you want to write a letter or an email for that matter, that's typically the type of letter we will receive in that style.
Thank you. And well, I have one further question on diplomatic relations and trade relations. So Mr. Weeks, since your introduction, you touch upon the role of your embassy to promote trade relations. But the point is that most of the time diplomats are like moving from an assignment to another. So how can business people establish long-term relationship with diplomats? Okay.
Yes. So yes, it's true. We tend to rotate every 3 to 5 years, but I would say typically most countries, they have chambers of commerce. This means business people, business leaders of, in this case, Swedish companies here, they tend not to rotate as frequently. Some of them stay 10, 20 years, some of them stay their whole lives. And to get connected with the Chamber of Commerce, I think, is the best way to, on the business side, to connect with companies from Sweden or from any other country that is represented here. But I don't know what the added value would be for, if you're looking for business contacts to stay in touch with a particular diplomat. I mean, then it's important then that my successor will pass on any contacts that might be important.
Thank you. So I think I will move back to Mr. Law with a question that is a bit more general on the context of media in the 21st century. And we see that media are changing, and our students wonder what actions are media taking to rethink their business model. And then how does the change in media affect the world of diplomacy? So I mean, this is like a question in 2 steps. So we'll ask first Mr. Law and then Mr. Weeks to share your opinion on this.
I'm not entirely sure about your question. The first question, is it, can you repeat it again?
Yes, like the first question is the change in media industry in the 21st century, and how media are rethinking their business model to stay relevant in the 21st century.
Got it. I think in the context of Asia, and well, to be honest, in a lot of areas in the world, traditional media, or what we call the the big brands, I mean, they still play a very important role. I mean, for example, if you want to read, the most updated world news, you would always be visiting the same websites again and again. And so I don't really see a lot of I mean, of course there are new brands, but I mean, at the end of the day, when people want credible information, I think it's still quite, we're still staying very relevant. I mean, the traditional media. That said, it's also very important for traditional media to sort of reach out to new audience, not just the younger generation, but also women audience, but also LGBT audience. So a lot of different subcategories, if you like, to sort of broaden our reach by creating different contents, by doing more active campaigns on social media, or setting up more Twitter accounts on different subject matters, and really I think hiring different people from different backgrounds to join the workforce as journalists also plays a very important role here. And so it's definitely right. I mean, the trust in media, as we have seen in the past few years, has gone down significantly because of all the fake news rhetoric being promoted by some politicians, or by the influx of social media news. And inevitably, I mean, it's definitely true that traditional media would have to rethink very carefully about how to regain the trust and credibility that we once enjoyed among the audience.
And the second part of the question that was for Mr. Weeks is how this change in media and how the role of traditional media has an impact on diplomacy and international relations.
Yes, I think I touched a little bit upon this during my introduction. We live now in a media landscape where there's a lot of information being published constantly, 24 hours a day. And for media organizations, I mean, I can't speak for Mr. Lau, but revenue is becoming an issue because people are, the general consumer is expecting news to be free. And some governments around the world, they finance
Hello? Did we lost him? So, well, whilst we are waiting for Mr. Weeks to reconnect, maybe Mr. Law, I can ask you a further question. So I think that since we are approaching the end of our session, I can, let's say, give a preview on our next webinar that is going to be next Friday, the 26th of June.
Mr. Weeks is back, by the way.
Okay. Mr. Weeks, maybe we need to unmute him again.
Yeah, he's currently being censored.
Thank you. I'm very unlucky, and as you said, Mr. Lau, it seems to come during those times when I was just into an interesting flow of what to say. But no, I think it's becoming increasingly difficult to know what news sources to trust, and also that private news outlets have less. They get less revenue typically, and it's more difficult for them to afford investigative journalism. So this also makes it more challenging and difficult for us to obtain trustworthy information.
Thank you. So as I was saying to Mr. Law, since we are approaching the end of our session today, and we have only a few minutes left, I would like to to ask one final question to all of you, that is also sort of glimpse and preview on our next webinar, that is going to be next Friday, 26th of June at 2 p.m. Thai time, still on the YouTube channel of our university. So this question is, again, on a topic that we touched a little bit at the very beginning of this session, and especially the trade relations and the future of globalization. And our students would like to know your perspective on Southeast Asia. So we have touched before, like the relations between Europe and China. So how do you see trade relations in Southeast Asia, both Southeast Asia with Europe and Southeast Asia with China and Hong Kong? So maybe Mr. Weeks, you can share your perspective, since, I mean, as a member also of the Chamber of Commerce, I'm sure that you have very interesting insights on this.
Yes, well, thank you. I would say that even before the pandemic, we were moving towards, we were moving away from globalism towards regionalism. Global value chains are shifting to become regional in nature. COVID-19 has shown how vulnerable we are in terms of the just-in-time economy, where with a click of a button, or when you press your order on Amazon or whatever it is, there's an intricate system, global system, whereby the item is produced and there's no sort of and delivered to you, and there's no time wasted anywhere in terms of the product being stuck in the warehouse or any. So it's been, we have perfected a system which works in normal times in the most efficient way. But when we encounter something like this pandemic, this shows us how vulnerable we are, because we don't have stocks, and certain types of products like this protective gear is only produced in a few countries around the world. So this was the US-China trade war, and sort of the general move towards more nationalism, less multilateralism, will move us away from what we've known to be the most greatest economic growth period in generations.
And I think Mr. Weeks has already talked about the main points here, but I'll just add a couple of more points. I mean, from the perspective of China and Hong Kong, Southeast Asia has always been a region that is of a lot of strategic importance because of the geographical proximity, but also because of the close exchanges between people and all sorts of cultural exchanges as well, economic activities, of course. And so I think before or after COVID, Southeast Asia has always been a very important partner for the region. In terms of Southeast Asia's relations with Europe, I think it's definitely getting more prominent, probably because of the US-China trade war and this sort of hegemonic confrontation between the two superpowers, that Europe really wants to find its own way and seek alternative trading partners. Southeast Asia is definitely playing a very important role. For example, if we look at the example of the United Kingdom after Brexit, they're seeking an observer seat in ASEAN and try to deepen relationship here. And so I think from the perspective of Southeast Asia, if you look at China, Hong Kong has always been a very close partner. If you look at Europe, it's definitely a lot of new input and new impetus, if you like, which might be an interesting opportunity when your students graduate.
So I would like to ask you, last 30 seconds each, some words of encouragement for our students that are going through this study from home and pandemic time. So how do you see the future of diplomacy, of international relation, of media, in the next years. And so if you can just like very quickly, 30 seconds, give some perspective and some encouragement to our students.
Sure. I mean, I think personal relationship is still the most important thing, despite the use of technology, social media, webinars. I think what matters at the end of the day is really this sort of personal connection, reaching out to people you're interested in or you care or you want to know more about. Don't be afraid, be confident. We shouldn't let technology to become a barrier, but rather I think technology should be the facilitator of personal exchanges.
If I can add to that, I agree with everything you're saying, Mr. Lau, of course. I think maximizing your networks is key, but it applies to all walks of life. And I think we live in the flip side of this is we live in a very exciting time, perhaps the most exciting time in generations, where with this changing technology is changing the way we do business and how we live. And I wish I was, I wouldn't say I wish I was growing up or much younger at this point of time, but there are a lot of opportunities ahead of us. And so I think not all this is negative here. I think there's a lot to gain.
So I would like to thank again Mr. Weeks from the Embassy of Sweden in Bangkok and Mr. Lau from South China Morning Post to share their experiences and their opinions with us, with our students and our audience today. And let me remind you that next Friday, 26th of June, we will be having a new session that will be completely focused on international trade and new emerging trends in globalization. And I do look forward to seeing you all. And I'm a little bit sorry that we had this technical inconvenience sometimes, like some Wi-Fi struggles and so on. So we hope to have 5G as soon as we can to overcome all of this. And thank again for joining us. Thank again for your time, and stay safe and take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Remember always, keep an open mind. Trust your judgment.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.